For a second day, services are on hold, and a third of the public sector is on strike, putting pressure on the government and the union to reach a deal. We have our front bench premiers panel here. They know a lot about this, the reality of negotiating with the public service. With me this evening, former Alberta Premier Alison Redford and two former Nova Scotia Premiers, Darrell Dexter and Stephen McNeil. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. We really wanted to lean in on some of your experience around the negotiating table and just dealing with public sector unions. Stephen, I'll start with you. As you watch this play out right across the country, what's going through your mind?
I'm not sure anyone would lean on my experience with collective bargaining in Nova Scotia, but maybe Darrell would. Listen, I think there's an offer on the table that most Canadians think is fair. 9% over 3 years. Bear in mind, 2 of those years are retroactive. They're talking about the inflationary challenges of right now, but we're talking about 2 years ago. Furthermore, I fully believe that where you work from, meaning work from home or not, is a management right. And I fundamentally believe the government should not move on that. That doesn't mean within departments that we look at what work can be done at home, but that is a management's right to be able to figure out how to deliver the services to Canadians in the best way they can. And I feel so strongly about this, quite frankly, that if I was the Prime Minister, we already know Jagmeet Singh will not support back-to-work legislation. The Conservatives are being very wily about it. I would call an election on the issue. I think Canadians are with the government on this issue. I would call an election on the issue and say, let's determine who's going to run the country. Let's determine how we move forward. And I do not feel any sentiment for people who are on strike these days. None.
Interesting. I think that Alison, Stephen points to a sense that I have, and I've mentioned on the program earlier this week from the government, that they do feel at this point in things that public sentiment is largely on their side, just because so many people outside of the public sector have not been able in any way to keep up with inflation, right? Many people are kind of dreaming of 9%, and I think there is a cognizance of that political reality at this point. I'm not predicting that it stays that way, because when government services are impacted, maybe some ire goes the government's way, but at this point, that's the sense I have. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right, and I mean, you can imagine that coming from Alberta, you've lived here for a while, there's a particular sentiment towards organized labor, which is not always very complimentary. I think on top of that, I'm not sure younger people really appreciate or respect the fact that there are these collective bargaining agreements or union agreements. I mean, younger people now are doing 2 or 3 jobs to get by. They're working a lot of service jobs. They're not sure whether or not they're going to have professional options in the future. And I think that looking at people that have their jobs protected and significant benefits, and talking about a 9% over 3-year increase, it doesn't resonate with most people, either with middle-class families that are raising kids or even with younger people who are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to ever afford to buy a house. The economics have changed. And if you look across the pond at what's going on in the United Kingdom, I think that the government standing firm on this is helpful. That's certainly what we've seen happen in the UK. And even though there have been rolling strikes there doesn't seem to be a public sentiment behind supporting strikers in the UK either. So I think that it's a different political and economic environment than it was maybe 15 or 20 years ago when we had sort of major public service strikes. I think the economy is different, and I think that younger people that are actively engaged just don't quite get why there needs to be this sort of protection for jobs anymore.
I do want to be fair, Darrell, to the union and say that they use a mediator with the government, and a few months ago that mediator came to the conclusion that 9% offer was a fair one. The government says we agree it's fair, and they waited until this weekend to actually table it with the union. So there's stuff to focus on, I guess you could say, or scrutinize on either side. Your assessment, though, of the kind of political sentiment around this at this juncture in time?
Well, first of all, let me say I wouldn't call an election on it. You don't unnecessarily give up power if you don't have to. And I also don't think, there hasn't been a strike in the public service for more than 40 years. So I don't think you can accuse the union of acting in a capricious manner with respect to this. I also think the kind of general atmosphere with respect to labor, the circumstances have changed dramatically. The unemployment rate is very low. It used to be that if you went into the public service, you were going in at wages that were likely better than you could find in the private sector. Certainly in the technology sector, that's not true anymore. Young people coming out of university in the technology sector, in fact, are getting better paying jobs in the private sector than they are in government. So if you want to hold on to people or be able to recruit people into the public service, you're going to have to address that. And I think what the union is reflecting, and they're reflecting, of course, the desires of their membership, which is that they see the inflationary trends that are in front of them. They want to be protected against that. Yes, they have not. Some of this is retroactive, but on the other hand, they haven't had that money for 2 years, so they've lost the benefit of it over that period of time. That's the first item, just looking out for the well-being of their members. The second thing with respect to working at home, this is just the environment that we live in nowadays. Many people work from home, including myself. Many work in a hybrid arrangement. But I actually think this is one of the issues that can be resolved between the government and workers. I think there is a lot of space to talk about how you determine who is able to work from home and who is not. I don't really think that that's something that's going to, in the end, make the difference. I think for the government, they're looking down the road and they're saying, look, we all understand what pattern bargaining is. And whatever I give in the way of raises now, there's a whole lot of unions coming along right behind these guys, and they're all going to be looking for exactly the same thing.
Yeah, on the remote work stuff, I interviewed the head of the union, and he said, he was willing to cede on managerial. That is managerial jurisdiction, but I know that is, as Stephen pointed out, something the government wants clearly delineated going forward too. They don't want